So in this chapter, the second video on this chapter, we're now looking at the question, why did God communicate to Belshazzar in the precise way, a kind of haunting way, with the fingers of the human hand writing on the wall, or at least we view it as haunting. But Belshazzar also did. He interpreted it not as a positive omen, but as a negative omen. But why was it negative to him? So the first thing to observe is that God writing with his finger, this is now the second story in all of Scripture where God is said to write with his finger. He did it when he wrote, when he inscribed his law, the 10 commands, onto the 2 tables of stone. According to Exodus, God wrote those with his finger. And in our very first story in Daniel himself, it's because he and his friends believe that God wrote with his finger, and they trust his word, and they have honored God, that they refuse to drink the wine and so on in Babylon. And now we have sort of its opposite, where God is writing with his finger, and Belshazzar, of course, has been utterly neglectful and disregarding not just of God, but of religion in general, and has made wealth and pleasure and security, the things that come from wealth, as his God. Okay, but the problem with that interpretation, though I think it's true that that is a parallel and it has meaning for us who read the whole of Scripture now, and for the Jews who knew the story and heard of the story, it wouldn't have communicated that same thing probably to Belshazzar. Don't think Belshazzar was probably familiar with the story. So there's no reason to assume that he was familiar with that story and that's what provoked his reaction. No, it probably relates more to, first of all, where this was written. The wall of the king's palace is where these fingers were writing, just opposite the lampstand where he could actually see that the fingers were writing. Why is that so important? Well, because one of the things wealth buys you is not only pleasure, but security. Belshazzar was surrounded not only by massively thick Babylonian walls, but his very palace was surrounded by thick, secure walls that allowed him to indulge privately in the pleasures he was indulging in that very night. So he would have assumed that with all that security that he had purchased, that what he was doing was truly private and secure. No Persian warrior's hand could penetrate through those thick walls, which is why Belshazzar could feast with such ease. And we have to remember at the end of this chapter that the Persian invasion of Babylon happens that very night. So he's living with ease. He feels totally secure because his money has bought him that security. But in reality, it's a pseudo security. His empire is going to collapse that very night. The way they do it, by the way, is they drain the river that goes under the city walls, and then the soldiers just walk in the shallow waters, walk right into Babylon City that night, and everybody's distracted because it's a holiday and so on. Nobody thinks they can get in anyway because they have the secure walls. So all that is to say that Nebuchadnezzar has purchased security. He's purchased security and privacy for his indulgences. And now a hand is on the inside of his security. And that very presence of that foreign hand writing a message is obviously interpreted as a very bad sign because it's a supernatural, and Belshazzar has disregarded religion in general. So that anything religious would now appear from the gods and would have penetrated his layers of security, which rested upon his wealth, suggests that he has put his chips on the wrong bet, and his very livelihood is at stake at the very least. So anyway, that seems to be what the message would have been to him in terms of the precise communication, just at that level. Okay. Now, was it just for God to judge Belshazzar? That's our next question. As we get to the rest of the story, we see that Belshazzar is going to be judged. He's going to die that very night. We read that that very night Belshazzar, the king, the Chaldean king, was killed. So was it right for God to judge him this way? I mean, after all, there were many pagan kings around who disregarded God, disregarded religion, and so on. Or even if they did honor some kind of religion, it was a false religion. So why is it just that God's judging Belshazzar? And the answer to this is going to come in the message that's communicated to Belshazzar. Okay? So it's going to establish the justice and the mercy of God. It is, you should observe, the final message that Belshazzar ever hears before he is judged. It is the message of final judgment. And it is a kind of defense of God's justice and mercy. So what all is communicated in the message that's going to come to Belshazzar in the latter, say, half to 2/3 of the chapter? That's the next question. Dig in, and we'll see you next time.